Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Monday Design Forum. Today we have Rachel Voila, I hope I say properly the name, and as a speaker, and Vanessa Ward, our lecturer from the design degree, is going to be the host of the session. So I hand over Vanessa, and welcome everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Jose. Acknowledgement to country first. I acknowledge that we're meeting and working on Aboriginal land. I pay my respects to the Palawa people, the traditional owners of this land, its skies, its waterways, and I pay honour to the elders past, present, and emerging. So welcome, Rachel Voila. We came to hear of you and hear of the project and the great work that you're doing with Kelpist, ostensibly using kelp into furniture design through a project with Joshua that Joshua, who is not here, although I probably should have invited him, who is working on building and growing kelp on disused oil rigs. And so that was kind of the starting of the project that we were developing for our third years, or at least to come in and have a conversation about that and see where they took it. That is progressing really, really well. And so I think this talk comes at a point where, Rachel, you're coming in and sharing your project as a sort of parallel to all of this. And we're really excited to hear the work that you're doing. But I was wondering if you could start by sharing a little bit about your background in design and where you have been and where you have gotten to before Kelpist.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just to echo your acknowledgement of country, I just wanted to acknowledge the Wangal people of the Eora Nation and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, acknowledging them as traditional custodians of knowledge for these lands. So I'm up in Sydney at the moment for this discussion. So I guess to give you some context as to how I've been led into Kelpist, to go back to my training or how I started working in design, just as a really quick background, I didn't study art or design at school. I was very sports focused. I really thought that I was going to become a professional athlete. Needless to say, that didn't happen, though I still love being active and playing sport on a weekly basis. But I got to a point where I graduated high school and I didn't see a career in professional sport, and I was really stuck. I was lost. And so I met with a really fantastic careers counselor over my work, and they started to pick up on some of the creative projects that I'd worked on. They said that they thought there was an opportunity for me to try and unpack that and explore it a little bit. So I took their advice. I'm grateful for that advice, and was able to enroll in UNSW Art and Design. For 1 year, I did just a Bachelor of Fine Art, which, as someone not having worked creatively, was really being thrown in the deep end because it was great in terms of an education, both like theoretical and historical, but also then just actually getting to get into studios and play. And that really opened up my mind to working creatively and exploring conceptual thinking, exploring abstract ideas and how they can be captured through sculpture and art. But I needed a little bit more structure in the way that I was working. So I transferred into the Bachelor of Design, and that's really where I got a foothold in an understanding of how design can really be used in an impactful way. I was really fortunate to learn under some fantastic practicing designers who are still actively practicing, and probably some of the leading designers. I would regard them as leading designers in Australia today, but I may be biased. Having worked under Trent Jansen and also Guy Ceulemans, who are both doing really incredible work here in Australia, they introduced me to object and to conceptual thinking, theoretical thinking, and exploring that thinking through object design. I really fell in love with that way of making, not making for the sake of making beautiful products, but making because you could tell a story, or you could explore an idea, or you could really unpack so many different topics in the material selection, in the narrative of how you design and make the product, in the people that you work with, and ultimately the context that you design for. So I really fell in love with that way of thinking and that way of working. And then I dedicated the 4 years of my design degree to really coming to understand how that worked. So I finished up at UNSW and had some work that was recognized by Wallpaper magazine as one of, I think, 5 or 10 graduates that year. And that's when I really understood that I had a skill there and I knew it existed. I just didn't know how to build a career out of working in a conceptual manner to make furniture. I guess linking it to Kelpist a little bit, in Australia, I found it really difficult to build a furniture career because it's so expensive to manufacture locally, and I didn't have the skills to manufacture locally. And so I wanted to work with the best craftspeople, and I wanted to pay them what they deserved for their crafting skills. And so to make a single chair, sometimes that cost me upwards of $5,000. And then how do you make a profit on some of that work unless you do it at scale? And I really didn't feel comfortable creating work at scale at that point of my career, early, mid-20s now. So I went away and started working more broadly in the design industry, just trying to understand what does furniture look like? How can I make this a viable career for myself? So I went and worked at two different places in kind of the furniture sphere. I worked at IKEA, and then I worked at Space Furniture. So both ends of the spectrum when we're thinking about how people consume furniture, really low price, accessible furniture, and then very, very high priced, inaccessible, but beautifully designed, beautifully manufactured, fantastic materials, like both ends of the spectrum. And I was really fortunate to have kind of the curtain drawn back on both sides of those, I guess, methodologies of making and selling furniture, and learn to love and appreciate both approaches. I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about IKEA, but from my experience of working for them as an employee, it was really positive. And I know there's so much more that they can do, but even in the time I was working there 5 years ago, they were really clear that they had a roadmap on how they wanted to become a more sustainable business. And I know there'll always be more that they can do, but at least they're very aware of the impact that they do have. And so I was brought into these businesses, but I wasn't making anything. And so, and again, apologies if I'm dragging this out. If it's too long, Vanessa, feel free to tell me.
I do have an interrupting question though, which is,
sure.
What were the insights and your takeaways from your experience? Because you have a design perspective at this point, and you're going into these very commercial enterprises. What was your design perspective, and what were your insights that you sort of arrived at from those experiences?
Sure. I guess for me, I'll start with IKEA and then I'll move to Space. And I work specifically for Cartel, which is plastic molded furniture, which is interesting now that I'm trying to do that with kelp. But at IKEA, I guess the first thing that I recognized was how transparent they were with their employees when I worked there. After a week of induction, I had access to their entire system and suite of information. I could look at the numbers that we were pulling, how many of each product we were selling, how much profit we were making on a day of working there. And as someone who's been with a company for a week, who's turning sometimes over $1 million a day in furniture sales or homeware sales, I thought that was really incredible. The transparency that they afforded all of their employees, even though we might be part-time or casual. But what I noticed as a designer there was just the choice, and then there was just too many things there, even though that some of them were really beautifully designed, and they were acknowledging the original designers of the work by having their names up and having sometimes bios about specific design pieces. Just the sheer mass and volume of products they had in that single store was really overwhelming for me. And I think that was very similar experience for a lot of consumers or customers. I imagine we've all been through an IKEA. It's just an overwhelming amount of choice, and all of it's so accessible, and a lot of it's very affordable. So just that was when I think the scale really got to me. Was there are so many of these products walking out our door every day. Where are they going? I know they're not going to last more than 5 years if they're used on a daily basis in someone's home. So that was kind of my first big takeaway. Was I knew they were working on sustainability, but just the sheer volume of products walking out their door every day and the quality of them wasn't what I hoped that they would be. So it kind of planted a bit of a seed in my brain as to, if I was ever to go about something that was, trying to make furniture at scale, how could I be sure at the end of that furniture's lifetime with its owner that it wouldn't have to go into landfill and cause issues for us down the track. But on the flip side, working with Space Furniture, it just wasn't accessible to, if we think broadly about people buying a chair. I'll use a chair as an example. When I worked for Cartel, I think the lowest price chair was upwards of $300 or $400. And for an average consumer, that isn't accessible. But the design was beautiful. The designers I were working with were, best in class, and designers that we learn about and aspire to one day work with, or at least have work that could sit alongside. So I understand why it's priced in that range, and I understand why it needs to stay in that price range. But again, it was really hard for me to digest people. It just felt like I worked in a gallery, to be honest with you. People would come in and look and things, and we'd be lucky if we got a sale or two on a weekend, which, to contrast IKEA turning over $1 million worth of mediocrely produced products, there was a real stark contrast. So I knew that there was an opportunity somewhere in the middle there. I didn't know what that looked like, and to be honest with you, I wasn't trying to solve that when I was, in my early 20s. I was just taking notes on how people were interacting with the furniture. And then again, how people, if we think about the end of life of these products, a lot of furniture sold at space has life with second, third or fourth owners because they maintain their value. So that is one positive thing of designer furniture, is people want to keep it. And if they don't want to keep it, they know that it has value and it retains value, and people sell that. So I guess I saw a lot of opportunities, but I was also quite disheartened with accessibility, and also the impact a lot of that furniture was having on the environment.
So what was your next step after Space 10 and IKEA?
Yeah, so
feels like you were searching for the middle ground.
Yeah, I was searching for the middle ground, and I was also wanting to flex my design muscles again. I'd developed some skills in sales, and I was really great at talking to people and understanding what they were looking for when they were searching for products at both the low end and at the high end. But I hadn't made for a couple of years, well, maybe not a couple of years, maybe a year or two, and I wanted to start making again. And so I was very inspired by Martino Gamper's 100 chairs in 100 days. And I thought that I want to try that, but I couldn't commit to 100 chairs in 100 days. So I started an Instagram-based project called 52 Chairs, or one a week. So it's 52 chairs in 52 weeks. And I committed to being consistent and designing and making an original chair every week for an entire year. One, because I wanted to make again. Two, because I wanted to learn some skills. I'd learned a lot of great conceptual thinking. I knew how to embed a narrative in an object, but I didn't really know how to make that object. So, when I alluded to the expense or the cost of making furniture earlier, that's one thing that I was trying to solve. I knew I wouldn't ever pick up the craftsmanship or the skills that, high-end, furniture makers in Sydney did, but I knew I could probably make some things myself. But then lastly, I wanted to, in a similar way, Martino Gamper did, just to unpack what a chair can or what it could be. Just because we picture a chair with four legs and a back doesn't mean that needs to be what a chair looks like or how it needs to function. So I was really fortunate that I did this project at a time when kind of local design was coming back into people's consciousness, at least in Sydney. I know it was happening more broadly around Australia as well. And by posting really regularly, maybe it was the algorithm, who knows what it was, but for some reason, people really took an interest in the project. And I was really fortunate to, in the space of a year, go from making furniture in my parents' backyard, and I'm very grateful they let me make a huge mess in their backyard, to having my own studio and exhibiting, having my first ever solo show as a furniture designer, and then also showing work internationally at the Milan Furniture Fair with the first ever all Australian furniture exhibit. Sorry, gosh, I'm getting my words. That's
quite a journey. And when you were going through that process of 52 chairs and 52 weeks, what were the highs and the lows? Like, what did you discover, but where did you run up against barriers?
I'm someone who works really well with having a clear, plan and project. So having that one a week kind of laid out from the very beginning is right in my wheelhouse. I'm good at not necessarily replicating a process, but I'm good at working to those time constraints and having the deadline, which for me was Sunday at 10 a.m, I needed to post a picture of the chair for that week. And so that was a real high for me, knowing that I could fall into that habit really easily, and that even though a week isn't a long time to conceptualize a chair, source the materials and make the chair, that I could work within the limitations I had, whether that was access to materials or time, or if I had an idea, I would often plan them in advance. So looking at what other, in terms of shapes or materiality or concepts that other designers were exploring, I'd kind of map out timeframes, maybe a month or two in advance, and be working on other chairs in the background while I was, making chairs in the weekly. So that was a real high for me. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. You probably had a question.
No, and I was it's a fantastic set of guidelines that you set yourself, like, just a kind of a really clear, deliverable and time frame, which is, it's great because it forces you into a discipline of making and thinking without any excuses. It's kind of like, I've set this, I've got accountability to the world because I've said I'm going to do it, and therefore I just have to do it, right? So it's a really fantastic framework that you set up for yourself. And what was the outcome of this? Like, obviously there was, the accolade of being part of Milan Design Week, and also, being part of an all Australian exhibit. What was the sort of follow on from all of that? Like, how did that evolve your career? Because it's a huge step.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, it was a very accelerated time period for me. A lot happened in that space of a year. And so it opened up opportunities, I guess is what you would say, because I had now had the recognition of being, chosen to be part of that exhibition. I think I might have been the only one of two female designers. And with, as I said, this interest or resurging interest in knowing your designers, knowing about your local designers, shining a spotlight on them, I had a lot of press opportunities come from that, and I was invited to start creating design. I was invited to, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. I was invited to submit work for design competitions. I was invited to participate in kind of media and press events relating to females in design and local manufacturers, local designers. But I guess the one thing that came from it, and it kind of arcs back to a little bit of what we were talking about prior to going live, which for context was being part of a university and having the safety net or the support structure around you of being able to take risks and being able to explore your ideas fully without worrying about where you'll land, was I was invited to come back and teach and work with the UNSW Art and Design. And that's kind of been what I've been part of what I'm up to the last 5 years, which has been teaching and lecturing casually at UNSW, which has reignited my love for working sometimes in really abstract ways, because that's kind of what we try to encourage is, to take risks. Let's really look at what's happening on the periphery and at the cutting edge of design. What materials are people working with? What processes? And how can we incorporate that into what we're looking to explore? And so being back within the university really allowed me the time and space to think about my own practice. I made a few collections, or really small collections, that I would then sell through exhibition, but I was never really able to find myself in a spot where I wanted to scale my work to anything more than that. I didn't want to create a run of 20, 50 chairs. I didn't want to create a made-to-order business. I kind of just really enjoyed setting myself I would sign up to exhibit, say 9 months in advance. I'd write myself out a kind of a conceptual framework, and then I'd make a collection of work to show there and then sell it, and kind of move in cycles like that. But it's changed a little bit since Kelpist has come onto the scene.
Yeah. So, and to Kelpist, how did you first become interested in kelp, or where did this material sort of appear on your horizon?
So that's a good question. And to be completely honest with you, I hadn't really thought about kelp as an opportunity for making with. I knew its incredible powers. When I say powers, it's the incredible opportunity it had for sequestering CO2, for regenerating marine ecosystems, but I never really thought about the biomass and how that could translate into a design object. And so MC, who I co-founded Kelpist with, who has since stepped away because their main focus is software products, kind of brought this idea to me when we were both kind of concurrently looking at seaweed as an opportunity. And they were really very excited by the opportunity to take biomass from seaweed farms or from regeneration sites and use that as a raw material for making furniture because of its properties of regeneration, because of the positive impact it has on those environments, you know, pulling nitrogen and CO2 out of those environments, but then also being able to lock that away into a chair for use. But then ultimately, because it is made of a biopolymer or a bioplastic, that can be broken down through, you know, some sort of composting mechanism and still used in a really positive way for the environment as opposed to sitting in landfill. So that's kind of how that idea was born, mostly through research and just interesting discussion.
Cool. And so what was the trigger? I mean, you've started a lot of projects before and sort of commissions and exhibition work that you've aimed for, but what was different about this that made you go, oh, let's start a company? How did that tipping point occur?
Yeah, so I think it was wanting to have more of an impact and just make beautiful furniture that told interesting stories. I'm sure we're all very conscious of and quite anxious of the IPCC reports that are being released. They're a constant cause of anxiety for me, and I just wanted to contribute by tackling problems that I see in the furniture industry. So in Sydney alone, I don't know the numbers for Tassie, sorry, but 9 million tonnes of furniture are discarded every year, and 85% of that 9 million tonnes goes straight into landfill. So what if I could provide a product that didn't need to go into landfill? What if there was an opportunity to make accessible, regenerative, sustainable furniture, price pointed in a way that people didn't have to fork out hundreds of dollars to buy it, but then when they did move or when their circumstances changed and when they no longer needed that product, they could return it to a local composting facility as opposed to having to throw it out on the curb and hoping that they never have to see that furniture again because they don't need it in their life. And so that's a real issue that we're facing on a daily basis here in Sydney. There's always furniture on the curb, it's picked up, it's shipped off to landfill, and then it just sits there and starts to get really nasty. And because it's not breaking down, it starts to release horrible gases like CO2, and it's a problem we need to address. And that's why Kelpist was born, to try and start tackling that.
And so what are the goals of Kelpist in terms of scale and market?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. It's something that I have really been spending some time trying to understand, because for me, while the furniture is the ultimate goal, right, while I'm trying to make furniture that's biodegradable or compostable, that's not going into landfill, I'm also trying to understand what sustainable materials look like, how we can localize material production, how we can create the least amount of impact with material production, and how we can then provide access to those materials. So as you mentioned, Joshua Castle is an incredible marine biologist and a thought leader, I guess you would say, in seaweed and in kelp. There's a lot of really impactful and really strong ideas about how kelp can be used for regeneration in marine ecosystems. And he's really, through his guidance and some of his leadership through thoughts around regeneration, has made me consider how we can't just take kelp biomass and put it into furniture and allow people to consume it. There needs to be some education and some knowledge through why we're using these materials and how they're creating an impact. And so I guess to come back to your question, because I could talk about that idea of regeneration and narrative and how we then create this sense of kind of ownership for the responsibility of those furniture or stewardship. The idea is to, at least at the moment, and this could evolve, but to work with regeneration sites. So that may be Joshua's offshore decommissioned oil rig or a local kelp farm, to take their biomass that's grown and had a positive impact on the environment, set up localized, community-run kind of biorefineries where we take that kelp, we process it on site, really, as close as possible to where the kelp is being grown. It's transferred into, it's transformed into biomass that can be used for creating structural furniture, whether that is into a raw material that's used for molding and making, or whether that's actually made into dimensional material that might be boards, or it might be into kind of like dimensional like lumber, a substitute. And then from there, it's used to make furniture either for myself or for other designers who would like to be able to work with that. So that's kind of the direction I'm heading at the moment. I was hoping to really lead with design objects first, but with biopolymer development, something I'm discovering is that's really what's kind of being my North Star at the moment. Each batch of biopolymer, I think I'm up to batch number 25 in my experimentations, has different qualities that lend themselves to different types of design. And until I nail in the kind of the biorefinery process, and how we take that biomass and turn it into, like you said, in its raw form cellulose that can be used for furniture making, I can't really design something. I need to know its limitations and its structural capabilities before I can then apply that to a design. So I'm letting the biopolymer lead me at the moment, and understanding how I can create the least impact possible through that whole process, from harvesting the biomass through to having biopolymer to design with. And once I have that process refined to a point where I know it's scalable, we'll move forward from there.
What does that, what does the biorefining process look like in your house, I'm imagining? And do you have examples to share with us?
Absolutely. I do. They're in my kitchen, but I didn't think to bring them. That's silly of me. But so basically, at the moment, I'm working with seaweed from South Coast Seaweed, and that comes to me already dried and ground up into little flakes. Think of them like if anyone uses nutritional yeast, it looks like nutritional yeast, but it's basically kelp. From there, I'm dealginating it. So that means I'm rehydrating it in an alkali solution, and that is pulling out some of that alginate for me, not all of it. I haven't, fully refined what that process looks like, but I'm using like chemicals or materials that I know are, first of all, accessible, they're not expensive, and they don't have, they're not harmful for the environment. And that's something that's been really interesting. Sorry, just to diverge a little bit. I have some friends that work in a seaweed lab up here in Sydney, and they were asking me why I was using mostly mechanical processes to try and draw the cellulose out of seaweed. And that was because I know I can offset the impact, offset the, the electricity that's running these machines with renewable energy, whereas the chemicals that you might use to extract alginate or to break the cellulose down aren't renewable, and they don't have, they're not leaving a great impact on the environment. And then I have all of these chemicals that I've used that I need to dispose of. So,
and why do you have to extract the alginate? If you could just roll back a bit on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. And from what I believe, at least through my discussions with other makers in the industry, is that by extracting the alginate, that allows us to have a final product that isn't so kind of sticky and gluey and susceptible to a lot of the moisture that is often impacts things like alginate or agar. So I know here in Sydney, we have a lot of humidity, and some of the earlier samples were really trying to exploit the alginate in our biopolymer developments. And I'd dehydrate them in my food dehydrator, and they'd get really crispy and they'd feel really encouraging. And then as soon as I took them out and, I might take them to a few presentations, access to the humidity really started to feel more like fruit leather or something along those lines. And if we're thinking in terms of creating something that's more structurally sound, ultimately I'd love to make a chair, just to kind of arc back to my 1 a week project. We can't have something that's going to degrade that quickly with access to moisture. And so cellulose, I know, can be treated and in a way that can protect it from some of the moisture that might be breaking it down. So that's why I'm extracting the alginate. And then, did you have another follow-up question for that one? Sorry.
Well, no, I know. I had no idea that's what alginate was and why you'd want to extract it, but it makes total sense. It almost feels like there's an opportunity to think of something where that kind of water absorbing, soft, malleable nature is a quality that you want to save you in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Something that I would like to really avoid is waste in the design of this biorefinery process. So I'll open this to you and to anyone else that might be watching or listening, is if you have an idea for what we could do with the kind of the water that's got the alginate in it, I would love to hear some solutions as to how that might be applied for another product or for another solution. Shimroth is a designer he's an architect, I should say, not a designer, I guess, depends what kind of language you like to use. And he is kind of using a very similar process where he extracts the alginate and then breaks down the seaweed. But then he mixes that alginate water in almost like as a binder to compress his biomass. And he's looking to make architectural bricks to either build with or to create sound barriers in internal spaces. And so he's found a solution for that, in that he's mixing the alginate in with his biomass once it's been processed, which is interesting, but I haven't really found much success with that at the moment. But would love to hear ideas, because I haven't.
Yeah, I'd love to know more about the qualities of the different alginate and various things that you're taking out, and obviously that impacts where you can go with it.
Yeah,
I guess one of the things is, it sounds like you're very much experimenting hands-on, going through what's possible, taking a raw material, dehydrating, rehydrating, extracting. I noticed on the Kelpist website, there's a lot of other people that you have on board as part of Kelpist in various capacities. Can you share with us what that process looks like? Because it's a lot for a designer to do material experimentation and understand what are the limitations of growing or harvesting versus maintaining biodiversity, etc. So could you, it seems very multidisciplinary, could you share with us a little bit about the roles of the various team that you have and how that process works?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're 100% right in that this is a lot to try and think about as one person. And I've always been an advocate throughout my entire design careers, if you don't know why something's acting in a certain way, or if you don't have the knowledge, for example, to make something yourself, go and seek out the people that do have that knowledge and allow them to guide you and help you if they're willing to. And that's always really held me in good stead. And I'm applying that same approach here at Kelpist. It's very much about collaboration and allowing those with the knowledge in certain areas. So, for example, working with Joshua or even Aaron Agar, who is a scientist studying at UNSW, to really guide accessibility of biomass. Like you said, what opportunity there is to take biomass from regeneration sites, or is it better to leave them in the ocean? Allowing them to really guide me on, they give me frameworks, they outline what kind of principles I need to apply. And ultimately, for someone like Joshua, he would ultimately become my seaweed supplier. So for some of these projects he's running, I'm very much relying on him and his team and their knowledge of the impact the biomass in the seaweed is having on an environment, knowing when they're able to pull that out of the ecosystem and know that it's not going to have a dire impact on it, or once it's had its impact, that it's okay to come out of the water. So the regeneration aspect of using biomass is very much out of kind of my design sphere. That's very much lying within the realm of the marine biologists. They're the ones that are actually looking at the data, they're tracking these sites as the kelp is being grown, they're watching the biodiversity come back, or they're watching the nitrogen levels drop because it's being sucked up by the kelp. So that's kind of in the life cycle of the regenerative product. This is very much driving how we get access to biomass. I wouldn't ever really want to take biomass from a site unless it was approved by the marine biologist to say, yep, we're okay to take this. It's, because kelp can grow so quickly, there are abilities to be able to harvest it in stages so that we're never kind of depleting an entire ecosystem of that resource. So that's kind of working in that space. In terms of building a startup and building a business, this is all very new to me. And so having, people like MC, who I did start this with, and then other advisors to as to guiding me on how to build a business and set out frameworks, having values and ways of thinking and working that are going to be sustainable has been really useful. I haven't really worked in businesses where sustainability and regeneration and impact are the driving factor of a business. I've never worked for anyone in that space. So understanding how we can set up a business so that it's designed to make an impact first and a profit second has been really important. Having advisors in that space has been really useful. And then ultimately, just trusting my gut as a designer and knowing that I can't just take a product and create a biopolymer and then sell furniture and expect it to fit into this ecosystem. That kind of the entire process needs to be designed from the ground up if we want to make the smallest impact or even possibly create a positive impact on the environment through the production and the consumption of this furniture. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a product that's going to be consumed. And so while I'm looking to provide an alternative to existing furniture, it's not as if there aren't other ways we could tackle this problem. We could look more at reuse and repair. We could look at, using other materials that have a longer shelf life in terms of their sustainability. If we use, sustainably sourced timber and they're designed to be repairable, that might even be a better solution than making furniture from kelp. But I think that they're sitting in different fields, and so understanding, okay, getting access to biomass, working with a biorefinery or setting up a biorefinery, and then ultimately designing a product so that it can come back to Kelpist and be composted at the end of its life is a really positive way to go about that. So allowing people with knowledge in spaces that has them, like I said, in regeneration and marine biology, just leaning on those guys and allowing them to guide me with their feedback and with their knowledge is really what I need to do. And ultimately, at the moment, it's just me experimenting with biopolymer. I would like to welcome on some material scientists to assist, but at this point in time, I haven't been able to kind of really find anyone working in this space specifically.
It's a hugely ambitious. No. I mean, it's a hugely ambitious sort of project for all of those reasons of heading towards the unknown rapidly. So I guess before we wrap up and open to questions, do you have a kind of roadmap on, what are the next steps and what's next for Kelpist and how do you go to market?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I'm actively and constantly working on biopolymer development, and what I would like to do ultimately for the third quarter this year is to have a mini version of this whole biorefinery set up locally. So whether I'm getting access to fresh seaweed coming in from regeneration sites or working with kind of some smaller local seaweed, I guess they're not really producers because they're collecting stormcast kelp and then processing it, but people that are providing kelp locally already. I'd like to be able to bring that kelp in and then really on a small scale practice what that biorefinery looks like. So process it in-house, manufacture some products, and then by the end of the year, I'd like to have my first batch of design objects up for sale. That's really a validation of the entire kelpist ecosystem, from sourcing sustainable regenerative kelp through to production. And I guess the roadmap at the moment would be to sell designs in batches to continue funding and furthering the research and implementation and development of these little biorefineries. So I'd like to be able to set them up ultimately locally. So, one in Tassie by a regeneration site, one in South Australia by a seaweed farm, one in New South Wales by a regeneration site, so that we're not having to ship this seaweed around for production. If we can source it in Tasmania and we can manufacture it in Tasmania and then we can sell directly to Tasmania, that would be the ultimate goal, as opposed to flying the stuff all over and, just the carbon expense of that isn't ideal.
Great, great ambitious set of goals. It's really exciting. I'm going to open this up. I know I've got a couple of my students in here who may have questions, but anyone else, of course, who has questions for Rachel?
Apologies, it was a bit of a ramble. I don't know where the time went.
Hi, Rachel. My name is Millie. I'm one of the past students actually of Vanessa. I'm working in commercial office design at the moment. And so this really interests me. And I also have a bit of an interest in kelp, just hearing about its capabilities. Do you see, I suppose you're still exploring its potential, but do you see yourself moving into commercial design at all?
I do. Ultimately, I would love to be able to scale the production of these types of objects, obviously, like I said, localized, but to a point where we could fit out both offices, or we could fit out, more commercial spaces if that was of interest to businesses. I had a really interesting call with an investor, which was kind of, I didn't expect ideas to come from them, but they were saying that they see office furniture and retail fit outs as more of an opportunity than kind of individual residential, because if I'm able to track, and I guess we didn't even really talk about this, but part of what I'd like to build into the design is this provenance or traceability of the positive impact of this furniture, in that a lot of big commercial businesses are looking to kind of activate or hold themselves to their sustainability goals and their sustainability plans, and investing in sustainable regenerative furniture may be part of what that looks like in the execution. So that's not on my immediate roadmap, because I need, like you said, I'm still very much figuring out how to take biomass and turn it into biopolymer or workable material. But in a couple of years' time, if that is if this has eventuated, then it's definitely something that I see an opportunity for, not only for furniture, but I also mentioned Shimroth, and I'll pop a link into the chat, or I'll send it over to Vanessa. And he's looking at, again, using regenerative materials to create what's the word, the little walls you put in between meeting spaces to create privacy. He thinks there's a lot of great sound dampening qualities that these types of materials have. So there are people exploring how these materials can be used, not only commercially, but also in kind of retail and office fit outs too. So that was a great question, and actually really relevant. Thanks, Millie.
When you were talking, it just reminded me, when you were talking about your kind of sort of biorefineries in each area, I remember reading about that great, I don't know if they call it like a plastics kitchen or something, which is in Melbourne, where they're just taking old plastic items and basically repelletizing them, so that they're doing this, they're ending up with all these different colored plastic pellets from their own personal recycling, and obviously the communities as well, and using that as a kind of localized makerspace workshop for small scale injection molding, which it sounds like this is a perfect alternative to that in the kelp space.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know if you're referring to precious plastic with that idea, but that's definitely a model that I am very interested in, and something that I see using as a model to set up more localized biorefineries. And interestingly too, they're the people that I've been speaking to around building biopresses. So they, like you said, they take waste plastic from the community and also from businesses, and they have all of these machines which are open source that people can build at home. But obviously they do this in a more kind of refined kind of studio-based setting. They grind them down, they use them for injection molding, and they've also recently started, like you said, being a small local manufacturer for people or small businesses that would like to use recycled materials, which is great.
Yeah, I did look it up. That is exactly the company that I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
And it's great. But our previous conversation offline, when you were referring to mycelium as well, it's almost as if you can pelletize a lot of these bioavailable materials and think about an alternative to plastics in this situation. And it's those types of facilities that it feels like are missing to be able to bridge that gap between designer and output design in terms of a commercial sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the dream ultimately, would be to use that same model, but apply that to, biomaterials, not only seaweed. I mean, that's what I'm focusing on, but I know there are a lot of people doing really interesting work with mycelium, with food waste. Wouldn't it be great if there was kind of one centralized place where you could come and use kind of materials and machines to be able to produce your own products as well? or get access to those materials too.
So many of the machines are common to all of those materials because you're effectively pulling out the cellulose in some format. And so there's so many commonalities. There's a lot of overlap and potential there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hydroxyl bonding is a beautiful thing. So, you know, it doesn't matter where the cellulose has come from. That you know, that process can be applied to cellulose that's been extracted from any material. So the machines should all work in the same way.
Wow, that's really exciting. I'm going to call it Sophie and Zoe. I know that we've spoken and you might have some questions. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to ask them right now.
Hello, yes, I'm Zoe. This is so
Hi, Zoe.
Nice
to meet you guys.
I have a big list of questions and you've pretty much just ticked them all off one by one. But we're basically, our project for this year is focusing on designing a circular festival model that we hope to execute within, well, by the end of this year, held in Tasmania. And we're looking at it from a seaweed focus of trying to use it in both materials and food, and basically as many ways as we can. And so you were talking before about the bricks made from, was it a byproduct of the the process? There was another.
I believe so. I will send Vanessa the link to Shim's work after we jump off the call. But from my understanding, he takes some of the waste products from manufacturing that's already happening with kelp. So I don't know if that is from creating like nutrients like sea salt or exactly what the waste product is, but he's taking them and then processing them himself for bricks for the kind of construction that he's looking to do. So he has some great contacts in Tassie, and he may also be a great source of knowledge for you guys as well. I mean, this sounds like an incredible project and an incredible event to organise. So I'd love to hear more about it and ultimately come down and participate.
Oh, awesome. That would be great.
We'd love that.
Do you know of any other examples of seaweed-based materials being used structurally that are already existing?
When you say structure, do you mean for the purpose of like furniture or architectural materials, or do you mean
either?
Not in Australia off the top of my head. I know a lot of the biopolymer development that's happening is looking at creating packaging. Ulu over in Western Australia is looking at creating textiles with seaweed. I don't know if you've had a look at their work, but they're doing incredible stuff over there, working with CSIRO. There are a few working internationally over in Europe, but again, I think it's pretty early days in terms of taking seaweed to create structural construction materials, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take seaweed and make furniture from that, which is construction material. So not that I know off the top of my head. I know there are people out there, I just haven't found them yet. I'd love to connect with them and learn what they're doing too.
Yeah.
There is a kelp cladding, is there not?
I'm not aware of that one. But I need to check that out if there is, because I'm constantly trying to connect with people who are working in the same space. If they're open to sharing with me, then
I feel as though I've read about kelp cladding. Let me find the link and I'll share it with you all. But there's a few I think in that direction. So whilst it's not structural, it does have covering and space defining properties as well. So there might be a substructure. I mean, mycelium's actually brilliant for structural. I think there's a lot of work being done on that. So I guess broadening that scope in terms of what's available material wise, but still performs the same function in terms of carbon sequestration and being totally recyclable, and locking carbon up is potentially where places to go.
Another material on that kind of vein, while it's not made from seaweed, there's a business called Zeoform with a Z, Zeoform. They're based up in Byron, and they use a range of different biomass or feedstock, as they refer to it. One of them being hemp, which we also understand can be regenerative with its ability to sequester CO2. And they microfibrillate it, they create cellulose, and they actually have now a patented product that you can buy where they're creating structural boards, or you can even use it almost like spray insulation, but it creates this really hard shell. So that'd be one to check out as well. I don't know if they sell the structural boards or just the microfibrillated cellulose from the different feedstocks, but they're regenerative, or partially regenerative, but also sustainable and 100% biodegradable or compostable. So good one to check out too. They're doing interesting work.
Ooh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Thanks.
Looking forward to seeing what you do.
Yeah, thanks.
Just to add to that for you girls, there are also some really interesting materials coming out of kombucha. I know, I think it's in Italy, and if again, I can pass this on later with a link, but there is a company, I think in the US or Italy, I can't remember now, but they're making an absolutely gorgeous leather material out of kombucha. Like, you'd hardly notice the difference between the original and their material. It's really beautiful. And yeah, mycelium is also something that a lot of people are using. And just of interest as well, oh God, 15, 20 years ago, I wrote an article for, oh God, no, I'm going to forget the institution in in Sydney. What's the big design place in Sydney? Powerhouse, thank you. Powerhouse Museum on edible interiors. And because I was really curious about how we could actually use sustainable materials that were edible, that makes them naturally, you know, very sustainable. And a lot of people were working with actual edible materials so that humans can actually eat. So a lot of them were unfortunately very sugary, so not very good for your health. But there were other materials too. There was a restaurateur, a chef, who was actually printing on an edible material that was the menu. So, so the menu was actually made out of foods and things that could be printed on and then eaten. So there are lots of, and then there were other really experimental things, but there was some amazing materials that were, again, edible materials that were made from these jelly-like substances that were made into bowls and things like that, that were incredible. And again, I just can't remember the names, but I will pass them on for you to Vanessa, so you can look them up. But, you know, just amazing work. So if you combine this idea of the seaweed with these other biomaterials, I think you'll come up with something really amazing. And just to sort of pick up on what was being said before, Rachel was saying, you know, about commercial interiors. That was the area that I was really interested in, because commercial interiors are, you know, renewed every 5 years. And when you look at the embodied energy of commercial interiors, it's huge. It far outweighs the embodied energy of the building itself, because it changes so often. So to actually have these biomaterials as the materials that are used for those environments is a really great way forward, before we perhaps start to look at you know, ways of reducing that time frame of how things are changed. So, you know, looking at those fast change, those quick change. So exhibits and events are those sorts of events as well, where things are being changed quickly. If you can have things that are biodegradable, then that makes them in the sort of whole life cycle really, really good, you know, in that whole life cycle chain. So sorry, I just wanted to pick up on those points, because I think that was important to make.
Thanks, Kirsty. Yeah. So Zoe and Sophie, once you're done with reforming the festival model with your circular vision and including seaweed, you can move on to commercial interiors. That's the next protocol. Good. We're almost at time. So I just want to see if there's any other questions before we thank Rachel so much for her time. No, looks like we're good. Rachel, thank you very, very much for your generosity and sharing your experience and inspiring us with your project. I can't wait to see where it all goes. And yes. Yeah, and let's stay in touch. I'd love to. We will be developing. Well, I say we, as the students, will be developing a digital sort of catalogue. An exhibition at the end of semester and also at the end of the year, which we'll CC you in on and give you a copy, so you can see what's happening. But yeah, I also we'd really love to stay in touch and hear how the project evolves. It's really, really exciting vision, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you having me here today. Apologies if it was a bit scattered. There's just so much happening, and I'm just so excited by all the opportunity that lies ahead. I guess one thing I will say is there's an opportunity for me to be exhibiting some actual products that I'm making with the kelp biopolymer I'm developing next February as part of the International Seaweed Symposium that's happening down in Hobart. So I'll be sure to let you know. It looks like there may be a design-based exhibition for products made from seaweed. So if that does eventuate, I'll be sure to share all that information with you. And I'd love to meet you all and kind of see all the exciting things that are happening.
Excellent. That sounds like any other information you're able to provide on that international symposium here in Hobart would be really great as well.
I will.
That seems like a really great goal for some of our students as well.
Exactly. They may, and if your students are working on their own projects or products with kelp, I'd encourage them to let yourself or myself know, and I can kind of loop them in to participate in that.
I will do that.
It does eventuate.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been great.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think Kirsty, do you want?
Oh, look, sorry, Rachel. Just a quick question, just following up on what I was saying before. With the products that you're looking at, are the nutrients taken out to such an extent that you couldn't feed that result to animals?
Certain, actually. That's something, let me just make a note of that. That's a good point. Do you mean so at the end of the product's life, it may be used as animal feed?
Yeah. Because I know that there's some research being done with red kelp to reduce off-gassing from cows and cattle. And, you know, if there's a synergy there, that could work really well with that, as well as other ways, but I just wasn't sure how much the nutrients were left in the material.
Yeah. I've not experimented with Asparagopsis, which is that seaweed that's used for cow feed, but that's a really interesting thought, and I'm going to explore that, and I appreciate you planting that seed in my mind.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Kirsty.
I look forward to seeing what you do with it.
Too. I can't wait to see what I make.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Rachel, Vanessa, Kirsty, and everyone to come in today, and beautiful talk. And I just wanted to say to everyone that next week will be a gap week because the presenter of next week has been moved to semester 2. Unfortunately, she cannot make it. It's Megan Perkins. She will do it next semester. But the week after, we have the creative duo from Mona, Scott Butler and Elliot Nemo, and they will be here to talk with us and talk about their journey. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to see you else, unless that there is no more questions. There is Michael, you wanted to say something because you turned on the, no, it's all right. Okay, so thank you so much for coming, and looking forward to see you in 2 weeks' time. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jose.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.